Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got another news and rumor video here to discuss. In today's video, we're looking at some injury updates from our past couple of days, some recalls, some reassignments, some waiver updates, a couple of pieces of news, and we've got some trade rumors, some big ones involving the Rangers, the Flames, the Blue Jackets, and a couple of other teams. We'll touch on all these updates coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get into this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to with all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Your support is greatly appreciated. Helps me keep this channel running. And don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. But in today's video, we got another news and rumor video here to discuss. So there were no signings since my last video on Thursday, talking about some news and rumors. So we're going to start off today, as we usually do, by talking about a couple of injury updates. So to start off with, E.Lindholm at Thursday's game with undisclosed injury and is out day-to-day right now. So not great news there, and he has now been officially ruled out for Sunday's Stadium Theaters game against the Tampa Bay Lightning. So not great news there for the Boston Bruins, as they'll be without their top line center. Another big piece of their forward group, Pavel Zacha, left Thursday's game with an upper body injury and didn't return, and will not play on Sunday. So that's a big blow there for the Bruins, as they will be without both E.Lindholm and Pavel Zacha on Sunday. Now the good news for the Bruins is the Olympic break's coming out, so hopefully it's nothing too serious for either guy, but still very bad blows there going into their Stadium Series game. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen missed Thursday's game and is going to be out at least a week with a lower body injury, so there's a very likely chance that Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen will not play until after the Olympic break, so very interesting note there. But Luukkonen is dealing with an injury that'll keep him out at least for the next week, so bad stuff there for the Sabres. Nick Foligno missed Friday's game with undisclosed injury and is out day-to-day. Doesn't sound like it's too serious, but he did miss yesterday's game due to it. Brad Marchand may missed a few games after he left Thursday's game with undisclosed injury. It didn't look overly good, so it sounds like he may miss a game or two before the Olympic break, so bad blow there for the Florida Panthers. Alex Turcotte is suffering with upper body injury and will be out until at least Wednesday next week. So with that being very close to the cutoff for the Olympic break, there's a very likely chance Turcotte's going to be out until after the Olympic breaks, which will not be great news there for the Kings, as Turcotte is a pretty decent forward for the LA Kings. Cody Glass from a Thursday's game with undisclosed injury may return on Saturday, which would be a big boost there for the Devils to get him back for his game against the Ottawa Senators. However, Jack Hughes left Thursday's game with lower body injury and didn't return, and is now ruled out for the rest of the games before the Olympic break. According to some recent reports, though, he isn't scheduled to miss any Olympic time. He'll just miss the last few games for the Devils before the Olympic break, but he should be good to go for the Olympics. So very interesting note there, but Jack Hughes should be good to go for the Olympics. Kiefer Sherwood, who's missed 3 weeks with undisclosed injury, might return to game action and make his San Jose Sharks debut on Saturday, which would be a big boost there for the Sharks to finally have their acquisition from a couple of weeks ago back into the lineup for the first time in a while. Dylan Holloway, who missed 4 games with undisclosed injury, was placed on injury reserve, so not great news there. Holloway missed a whole bunch of time in December and early January due to injuries, so hopefully this is nothing too serious. While Oscar Sundqvist, who also missed 4 games with ankle laceration, was active off of injury reserve and returned to game action on Thursday. So a big boost there for the Blues to get Sundqvist back into their bottom 6, but a bad blow there for the Blues to lose Dylan Holloway onto injury reserve. Ryan McDonagh, who missed over a month with undisclosed injury, was active off of injury reserve and returned to game action on Thursday. So the Bulls have been without McDonagh for quite a bit of time this year. I think he's only got like 18, 19 games of NHL action so far this year. So to get McDonagh back into the lineup is a big boost, especially right before the Olympic break for the Tampa Bay Lightning's D-core, so very interesting note there. And Matt Roy missed Thursday's game with a lower body injury and is out day-to-day. Doesn't seem like it's anything too serious, but he will miss the next little bit for the Washington Capitals. So very interesting note there, but some very interesting injury updates from our past couple of days. Next we went over to some recalls, reassignment, and some waiver updates. When it comes to some recalls, Matthew Poitras in Boston was recalled, Sam Rinzel in Chicago was recalled, Justin Holl in Detroit, Brett Berard in New York, Rutger McGrady in Pittsburgh, Matt Luff in St. Louis, Coughlin and Romberg in Vegas, and Stevenson in Washington were all recalled. It sounds like Thompson might be a little bit banged up, so the Caps recalled Stevenson for just some added insurance. The Blues, because of all of the injuries when it comes to guys like Holloway and Sundqvist, they just wanted some added insurance in case they were having some lingering injuries, so they called up Luff. The Penguins recalled McGrady just to provide some extra depth. The Rangers recalled Berard because of the open space that they got when they moved Soucy a couple of days ago. The Red Wings called up Justin Holl because of the injury to Simeon Edmondson. Sam Rinzel was recalled by Chicago after having a little bit of a stint at the AHL level. Poitras which was recalled by Boston because of the injuries to Zacha and Elias Lindholm, and the Golden Knights recalled Coughlin and Romberg just to provide some added forward and defensive depth. So very interesting note there, but some very interesting recalls from all of those teams. While Nystrom in Carolina, Svechkov in Nashville, and Simashev in Utah were all sent down by their current clubs. So very interesting note there. The Canes recently got Gosper off of injury reserve, so they don't need Nystrom at the NHL level anymore. The Predators just got a couple of guys back off of injury reserve too, so there's no need for Svechkov. And after serving, I think, a couple of days at the NHL level, Simashev's going back down to get some more AHL playing time. So very interesting note there. Nystrom, Svechkov, and Simashev were all re-signed by their current NHL clubs to the AHL, so very interesting note there. Going over to a couple of waiver updates. In our last video, we talked about how Noah Philp in Carolina was on waivers. Now, I thought there was a very likely chance he probably does clear because he is more of a bottom six guy, but he was claimed off of waivers a couple of weeks ago by the Edmonton Oilers, so I thought maybe there was a chance that the Oilers could put in a claim for him, maybe reclaim him, or because he was claimed off of waivers a couple of weeks ago, he could be claimed again, but that was not the case. Philip actually did clear waivers, so he's still with the Carolina Hurricanes team, and he's at their AHL affiliate, so very interesting note there, but good to see that the Carolina Hurricanes snuck him on waivers. Well, yesterday we saw Vincent Iorio placed on waivers by the San Jose Sharks. Iorio was also claimed off waivers earlier in the season from the Washington Capitals, so I do wonder if the Capitals maybe try and reclaim him back to potentially send him back down to the AHL. Given the fact he was claimed off of waivers early in the year, I could see a couple of other teams who need some defensive help, a guy who can be like a 6'7" defenseman on their current clubs. Maybe they try and go after Iorio, so I'm not going to say it's a guarantee he gets claimed because he is more of a AHL level defenseman, but I could see a couple of teams claim him, and I wouldn't be shocked if the Caps reclaimed him either. So very interesting note there, but keep your eye on Vincent Iorio later on, as there's a very good chance he could wind up being claimed, but Noah Philp did clear waivers for the Carolina Hurricanes. So very interesting note there. Now, just a couple of other quick updates here. First, we talked about, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, how the Dallas Stars were going to host a Stadium Series game, I think in the Dallas Cowboys Stadium next year in February. Well, the details have now been announced. I think it said it was going to be on February 20th next year that the Dallas Stars will host a Stadium Series game, and it'll be against the Vegas Golden Knights. So the Stars will play the Golden Knights in a Stadium Series game in February 2027. So it'll be a very interesting game. Those two teams do have a history. They both played in the conference final a couple of years back. They also played in the first round 2 years ago. So very interesting note there, but the Stars and Golden Knights will play in a Stadium Series game next year. So very interesting note there. And lastly, Patrick Kane back over on Thursday became the all-time point leader for US-born players. He passed Mike Modano, and he is now the all-time US-born player leader in points in NHL history. So very interesting note there. Very interesting to see that Kane actually passed Modano. So really good stuff there. And Kane's now your US-born all-time point leader in the NHL. So very interesting note there. And I think he's going to get that a little bit higher because he's still got a couple of games to go for the Red Wings this year. So very interesting note there. And lastly here, going over to a couple of very intriguing trade rumors. We've got 4 very interesting trade rumors here to talk about. We're going to start off with the Winnipeg Jets. David Pagnotta recently was talking, I think it was on like one of his radio hits or podcast appearances or something like that. And he was talking about the Winnipeg Jets, and he says that according to some of his sources, the Winnipeg Jets are very likely to move off of Logan Stanley before this year's trade deadline. Now that makes a ton of sense. The Jets are not in a good position to make the playoffs this year. They've been winning a couple of games as of late, but they're still, I think, like 9-8 points out of a playoff spot. Like, it's not looking too good for them unless they go on some sort of tear after the Olympic break. Very unlikely chance that the Jets are going to make the playoffs, so very likely chance they are going to be sellers. There has been some talk with them maybe trying to get a long-term upgrade, which I think is a possibility, but there's also been some talk with them moving off some of their pending UFAs or guys on like shorter-term contracts. It could be a UFA maybe next year, and one of those guys is Logan Stanley. He's having a career year. Like, up to this point, I think he had like 6 career goals, but already this year, in and of itself, he's already gotten 8 goals this year, which has already trumped his like last 6 or 7 years of goal production in the NHL. Like, Stanley's having himself a career season. He's also a stable third pair defenseman who is huge. He's a massive human being, and he knows how to lay the body. So for teams who need some third pair defensive help, Stanley would be a massive improvement. I don't think it would cost them a whole bunch. Like, I know Stanley's playing really well this year, but I think you could probably have him for like a 3rd round pick and a decent prospect, maybe like a 2nd round pick. I don't think it would take that much. There's been some talk recently about maybe a guy like Luke Schenn getting moved too by the Winnipeg Jets, who they acquired at last year's trade deadline. So very interesting note there. Those are 2 guys we're going to have to keep our eye on. But Stanley, for sure, like, he's having himself a career season. I don't think the Jets are planning on bringing him back. With him being a pending UFA, the return they could get, I definitely think the Jets will consider that sort of a deal. I also saw, I think, on Elliot Friedman's recent 32 Thoughts podcast, he mentioned that Detroit and Winnipeg are talking, and they were speculating about potentially a guy like Logan Stanley, maybe a guy those two are discussing. So that's what I see on that, but keep your eye on the Winnipeg Jets. While there probably won't be huge sellers, there's a very good chance to move off some of their pending UFAs before this year's trade deadline, and Stanley, who's having himself a career season, seems to be possibly one of them, so I'll have to wait and see on that. Next, going over to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Pierre LeBrun recently mentioned that the Columbus Blue Jackets are getting a ton of calls on center Charlie Coyle. Now, Coyle was acquired in the offseason from the Colorado Avalanche as sort of like a cap dump to help the Colorado Avalanche in a cap bind. The Avalanche got a couple of pretty good pieces, a few picks. They got Gavin Brindley, but the Jackets were really hoping that Coyle could do really well, and he has. Like, Coyle has been a fantastic fit for the Columbus Blue Jackets, especially since Rick Bowness has turned into the head coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets. He's been phenomenal. He had a hat trick last night against the Chicago Blackhawks. So once again, the Jackets are 6 points, I think, out of a playoff spot after their win last night. I don't think they're guaranteed to make the playoffs by any means, but I could see them go on a run with how good they've been playing under Bowness. And if one of Pittsburgh and the Islanders slip, I could see the Jackets overtake them. So I don't think it's a guarantee that Coyle will get moved, but if they're still on the outside looking in, which I think is a very likely possibility come the trade deadline, I could see him still move off maybe one or two UFAs, and I think Coyle might be one of the more interesting ones to watch out for. He's a center. He can also play on the wing, but with the lack of centers available on the open market, it makes Coyle a really hot commodity. I could see a couple of teams potentially offer a first-round pick, maybe not this year, but a first-round pick at some point for Charlie Coyle. Like, I could actually see that happen. So I'm not going to say it's a guarantee. Like, Coyle's been really well in Columbus. The Jackets might want to try and keep him if they have any resemblance of going on some sort of a run and try and make the playoffs, sort of like they did last year. But still, like, I think Coyle, the return they could get for him, given the fact he's a rental center, which there are not a lot of on the open market, I think might convince Columbus to trade him. So after waiting to see on that, I could see him go like Minnesota, Carolina, Los Angeles. There's probably a couple of other teams out there too who need some center help. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but keep your eye on Charlie Coyle, as if the Jackets do start to fall out of the playoff race, or if they're still hovering around like 5, 6, 7 points out of the playoff spot come the trade deadline, Coyle's going to be a name we're going to have to watch out for. Next, going over to the Calgary Flames. According to Pagnotta, he says that Nazem Kadri, while he has not asked to be traded by the Calgary Flames, has mentioned to the Calgary Flames that he'd be open to a fresh start. So it seems like Kadri is open to a trade. So we could see a Kadri trade actually before this year's trade deadline. So very interesting out there. Kadri has a $7 million cap, but I think for 3 or 4 more seasons. It might be 2, I'm not exactly sure, but he's got a couple of years left on his term, so he's not a rental. And once again, sort of like with Coyle, he's a center. There's not a whole bunch of centers on the market, so he would be a hot commodity for teams who are looking to try and add like a solid second, maybe even first line center. There's been some talk about a Colorado reunion with Fagan out. There's been some talk about him going to Dallas. We just mentioned 3 teams who really need centers in Los Angeles, in Minnesota, and in Carolina. Could any of those teams have some major interest in Nazem Kadri? So we'll have to wait and see on that. There's a couple of very interesting centers who are signed for a longer term, who are veterans who could potentially get moved, like Trocheck, like Shen, like O'Reilly, and like Kadri. So those guys are going to be in high demand if there are a couple of teams who have some major interest, and Kadri seems to be a guy who could easily get traded. And it seems like one of those hurdles that was mentioned earlier to potentially get to a Kadri trade was, would Kadri want a fresh start out of Calgary? And it seems like he'd be open to it at this point. So very interesting note there, but Pagnotta does say that Kadri will be open to a fresh start. I'll have to wait and see if he winds up getting dealt, but it seems like it's more likely right now than it was a couple of days ago. So very interesting note there, but keep your eye on the Flames, as I don't think they're done yet. Whether it's Kadri, Coleman, or flipping Zach Whitecloud, I do think they're going to make some moves, but definitely keep your eye on Nazem Kadri. And lastly, here going over to the New York Rangers with Artemi Panarin. On Elliot Friedman's recent 32 Thoughts podcast he posted last night, he had a long list about the Panarin updates, mentioning a whole bunch of teams that I'm going to talk about here with you guys. So I'm going to try and go over these in sort of like quick hit situations here, because he went on for a long time talking about a lot of these teams. So first, he does say that Artemi Panarin wants, as a total money on a new extension, $50 million. So that'd be sort of like 5 years times $10 million, or 4 years times like I think it was like 11.5 or 12.5 million on a new extension. There's been a lot of talk that Panarin wants to get an extension done as part of a trade, so that might make some teams more likely than others. So it seems like Panarin wants around 50 million, which I think is a little bit expensive. I think him around $10 million, maybe like 3 years, would be a lot better. I don't think he's going to be living up to a $12.5 million cap hit in like 3 or 4 years. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there, but that's sort of the money that Panarin wants on a new extension. And when it comes to potential landing spots for Panarin, Friedman says that Dallas, Colorado, Anaheim, Minnesota probably can't do it with an extension. He says if the Wild want to sign Quinn Hughes, they probably couldn't sign Panarin to an extension. He says that the Ducks really have a couple of other RFAs who are going to be needing extensions in the near future, and signing Panarin to an extension would really hinder that, so they only want him as a rental. Colorado, Dallas are both in precarious cap situations. They don't really want to do it with extensions. So with all of that in mind, those 4 teams probably are very unlikely at this point in time. He says that LA might have the assets and the appetite to do it, but he says at this point in time, they do not want to do it. They don't know if trading assets is the best thing for them right now, with them being on the outside looking in on the playoff mark. So maybe the LA Kings could get into it, but at this point in time, it doesn't sound like it. He says that Seattle might be willing to deal right for a guy like Artemi Panarin, but he says that that sort of deal is probably unlikely at this point in time too. I would think that would make some sense. I think that the Kraken should try and trade right for a younger guy like a Kyrou, like a Tippett, like a Lafreniere, instead of a guy like Artemi Panarin. He says that Washington's aggressive and only wants to do it if there's an extension, so it seems like Washington might be the front runner right now to try and land Panarin. We talked about this a whole bunch, about them trying to have Panarin as the sort of transition out of the Ovechkin era. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but it seems like they will be very, very interested in doing some sort of a deal. When it comes to Carolina, he says that they're always in on big players, and they will be open to doing it with an extension. We know that they're always in talks when it comes to bigger players. Look at Rantanen last year, so we wouldn't count out the Carolina Hurricanes. He says that Panarin does like the idea of going to Florida, but he says that he doesn't think that the Panthers could offer him a contract that he really does like. Plus, I don't know how the heck they would be able to manage that cap for this year. So very interesting note there, but it seems like while Panarin does want to go to Florida, they're more of an unlikely scenario given their cap situation. He says that Panarin is also open to the possibility of going to San Jose, and the Sharks will be willing to extend him, but he mentions that San Jose might be wary about signing Panarin to an extension given the fact that their bigger contracts that are coming up with guys like Will Smith, Macklin, Celebrini. So those will be some very interesting possibilities. He says that Detroit has some interest and would do with an extension. We know that Steve Yzerman likes to do things with players with term, not pure rentals. So if they could get an extension, Detroit might be a landing spot. He also mentions other teams that he's hearing would be the Islanders, the Flyers, the Golden Knights, and the Mammoth. He says that all those teams do have some interest, but maybe not as strong as those other teams that were mentioned. So very interesting note there. From what I gathered with that, I think Washington, Carolina, San Jose, Detroit would probably be the front runners right now. If Florida had a little bit more cap space, they would probably be the front runners. Seems like Seattle, Los Angeles, the Ducks, the Avs, the Stars, the Wild, they might be able to do it, but probably not with the extension, and probably not at this point in time. So I would keep my eye on probably Washington. It sounds like might be a front runner at this point in time, but I would also keep my eye on Carolina, on San Jose, on Detroit. If they could somehow make the cap work, maybe Florida. So I'll have to wait and see on that, but keep your eye on those teams. As Elliot Friedman does say that those are the situations with all those teams that are currently involved in the Panarin sweepstakes. And he also mentions that he did check in, but he says that Toronto does not have any interest in acquiring Artemi Panarin at this current point in time. So very interesting note there. I'll have to hear your thoughts with what I just listed out. Who do you think is the front runner right now for Artemi Panarin? Could it be Washington, San Jose, Carolina, or another team? I'll have to hear your thoughts on that. Do you think that Kadri gets dealt by the Flames, Coyle gets dealt by the Blue Jackets, and Stanley gets dealt by the Winnipeg Jets? Definitely your thoughts on all of that, plus all the news updates, the signings, the recalls, and all that stuff down in the comment section below. That's all I want to talk for today. Remember to like this video, and if you like to, remember to subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so check that out. Leave a link to that in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.